My babysitter disappeared in the summer of '99, although sometimes it doesn't feel all that long ago. Like when I wake up from the nightmares where I'm caressing her soft blonde hair. Her name was Michelle Dunbar, and for those first few days, everybody figured she had run off with her boyfriend. We lived in a quiet neighborhood after all. Stuff like that just didn't happen here. The three of us set off that morning. There was me, my twin sister Evelyn, and our cousin Georgia. Georgia lived right across the street, which meant in those summer months she landed on our doorstep every day at 8 a.m., and she didn't leave until her mom called her in for supper. After a few rounds of hide-and-go-seek in our back garden, Georgia said, "I'm bored, let's go to the park." The sky was the color of mackerel, my least favorite food. You just knew that it could start raining at any second. I said, "Nah, we'll get soaked." "No, we won't," she replied matter-of-factly, like she could control the weather. "It will. We should play Mario Kart instead. Let's put it to a vote." Immediately I groaned. A vote essentially meant girls versus boys, and since the two of them were closer with each other than to me. In fact, people usually assumed they were twins on account of their matching brown hair and green eyes. Like always, the two of them won through sheer numbers advantage. Georgia stuck out her tongue. "You lose, Charlie." From our house, we crossed the street and squeezed through a fence surrounding the nursing home. You needed to move fast, otherwise the elderly residents came out to shake their walkers and yell. After that, we circled 3 empty football pitches, followed a short trail through the woods, and voila, there was a 12-foot-high fence around the park with a front and rear gate, both of which made this horrible whine of metal against metal as they opened. The area was divided into 2 sections, one for younger kids, with swings you couldn't fall out of and tube slides, and one for kids our age, which had a climbing frame and proper swings that you could launch yourself from. The only other people there was a mother with her infant son, and they left pretty quick on account of a dark storm cloud that rolled in. Usually the place was so overrun that you had to queue up for a turn on anything, but that day we had the whole place to ourselves. The 3 of us played shoe fling, this silly game where you built up momentum on the swing and then kicked your shoe off when you reached the highest point. Whoever's traveled the furthest won, and then inevitably everybody scrambled to recover their own shoe while battling to toss their opponents over the fence, forcing that person to hop all the way outside. After I won 3 out of 5 rounds, Evelyn and Georgia wandered over to the benches, which sat beneath this curved metal shelter supported by 3 posts. Mostly it was a space where parents sat in the shade and relaxed while their children went absolutely crazy. Since the girls did gymnastics at school, they scaled the shelter with ease. Then from the top, they called me names and pretended to sunbathe even though it was still super dreary out. To climb the shelter, you had to put your foot on this metal bolt sticking out of the middle post, straighten your body and grab the top. But being a husky nerd, this maneuver eluded me. My face turned completely flush as I slid down the pole again and again. After 5 minutes, I was panting heavily. There was nothing that I could do besides wait for my turncoat sister and bratty cousin to climb down. Soon, I needed to go to the bathroom. I went through the gate and around the side of the park, where the grass grew so tall that it touched my chest. There, all I had to do was take 20 steps out and hunker down a little to disappear. As an added bonus, during the warmer months, you could charge into the field and send thousands of different colored butterflies soaring into the air. As I found a nice spot and watered the plants, midges danced around, forming clouds. I waved them away and then buttoned up my shorts and strode back toward the park. I had a side-on view of the shelter where Evelyn and Georgia leaned over the edge, looking at the space directly beneath them. And there, through the mesh fence, I saw a stranger. He looked older and taller than my dad. and he was saying something to the girls. Even from a distance, the guy gave me the creeps. He wore this long trench coat and had a backpack around his shoulders. What little hair he did have was tied into a long ponytail. My brain frantically tried to match him up with all the adults that I knew. Maybe he worked at the school, possibly as a janitor or technician, or maybe he was somebody's dad, and Georgia and Evelyn had recognized him from one of those girls-only sleepovers. As I quietly shuffled forward for a closer look, the man swung his pack onto the ground and pulled a Mars bar out of the side compartment. The smart thing to do would have been to rush home and tell Mom, but it seemed wrong to abandon Evelyn and Georgia like that. Instead, I shuffled along even further, straining to hear the conversation. It began to rain. I remember the sound of water splashing against the wooden playground equipment. The man broke off a portion of his chocolate bar and waved it around. After another brief back and forth, the stranger raised his volume, to the point that I could detect anger in his voice. And then, without warning, he jumped up and swiped at Georgia. Even from a standing position, the guy could almost touch the top of the shelter. Evelyn and Georgia shrieked and shuffled back along the curved surface. I remember thinking the rain would act as a water slide and send the two of them careening over the edge. It sounds ridiculous, but at that moment, I was more terrified that our parents would ban us from the park because one of them fell and broke a leg. When they reached the far side, the man circled around to try from the back. The two of them scrambled into the middle, mere inches outside of this weirdo's seemingly endless reach. That shelter couldn't have been more than 6 feet long and 7 feet high. Terrified that the guy might spot me, I lay flat on my stomach and crawled to the very edge of the little no man's land, my eyes fixed forward. After a few more attempts to grab the girls, the man stared fixedly at the bench. He put one foot on it and hoisted his top half up onto the shelter, bringing himself eye level with Evelyn and Georgia, who pulled their knees into their chest and shrieked. My heart pounded wildly against my chest. Even though he wasn't in great shape, the man would no doubt make his way up sooner or later. I had to help them, but how? Without thinking, I took a deep breath and belted out the words, "Dad, come quick!" at the very top of my lungs. The man's head immediately snapped in my direction. I made myself completely flat, the grass tickling my face, raindrops larger than marbles pelting my back. An army of midges landed on my neck and took thousands of little bites. I itched everywhere but refused to move a single muscle. There was no question that he had seen me, that he had already started marching over. I wanted to be somewhere safe, like in my bedroom playing Mario Kart. That horrible crawling sensation against my flesh made it feel like some sort of horrible nightmare. It was a good thing that I had already peed. I squeezed my eyelids together and began counting. When I reached 1,000, it felt like a long enough time had passed. I looked up. So far, so good. The stranger wasn't looming over me. Up ahead, Evelyn and Georgia were still on the shelter, safe and sound. The man had disappeared. Going as slowly as humanly possible, I left my hiding spot, periodically waving bugs away, and continued into the park. At the front entrance, my eyes scanned from left to right. Still all clear. "What happened?" I asked as I had approached the shelter. "That man tried to make us come down," Georgia replied. Her eyes looked all red and puffy. "He offered us chocolate." My thoughts whipped back to school, to a special assembly where they told us to never take sweets from strangers. "We should go," I said seriously. "We should go home and tell Mom. She'll know what to do." There was snot all down Evelyn's chin. "I'm not coming down," she said between sniffles. "He might come back." I glanced in the direction of the rear gate. My legs would not stop shaking. Evelyn said, He was in such a hurry that he left his backpack. Look. They both leaned all the way over the edge and pointed to one of the benches. Sure enough, there sat a backpack like the kind that we took to school, only much larger. You'd see a bunch of 20-somethings carrying those kinds around while interrailing. My cousin said, "Charlie, run home and tell your mom that we're stuck. Quick, before he comes back." "You expect me to run home alone?" Her mouth became a grim straight line. "It's either that or climb up here. Nowhere else is safe." You couldn't argue with that kind of logic. Okay. Less than 10 steps from the shelter, Georgia added, "Charlie, wait." "What?" "Check his bag." I glanced at the pack, practically bouncing on my heels, desperate to get away. "Why?" "He might have left something inside it, like a wallet. If you show it to the police, they'll know how to catch him." A memory popped into my head. 2 months earlier, there had been a break-in at the nursing home, the same one that we had cut across to reach the park. Somebody had stolen a box of jewelry from one of the residents who lived on the ground floor, and Noah Carnes found a necklace the thief dropped while escaping into the forest. Noah took the precious item straight to the reception. As a reward, the staff bought him 5 packs of Pokemon cards, and he pulled a Charizard in his first one. He even got his name in the local paper, accompanied by the words, "Hero Boy." If I rummaged through this guy's backpack and found some incriminating evidence, like say, a bloody knife or a written confession to a series of robberies, that had to be at least worth 20 packs of cards, right? Despite my gut begging me to make myself scarce, I grabbed the pack. The dang thing was hefty. Even a full-grown adult would have struggled to lift it. And whatever was inside stung 10 times worse than any mackerel. Immediately, my guts churned and twisted. The zipper, which got snagged on something coarse and bristly, wouldn't open any more than 2 or 3 inches, no matter how hard I tried to pull. Even still, that was enough to make the smell 1,000 times worse. I had to keep myself from retching. "What is it, Charlie?" asked Georgia. I pushed 2 fingers through the narrow gap and prodded whatever lay inside. It felt all wiry and knotted. I don't know, a fur coat maybe. Just then, there came this whine of metal against metal. I heard the awful sound and knew immediately what it was, and I spun around. There stood the stranger, his jaw tightly clenched. He sprinted toward me. Oh crap, he was actually sprinting toward me. Above my head, the girls cried out in high, frightened tones, "Run, Charlie, run!" From this point, the world and everything in it went into slow motion. Between strides, the man seemed to hang in midair for seconds at a time. I stood there hypnotized, a deer caught in a big headlight. The front gate lay to my left, but to escape, I would have to cover the distance and pull it open, which would cost valuable seconds. There wasn't nearly enough time. The second option was to fight, which my brain immediately dismissed as a dumb idea. That meant there was no choice other than to climb. The girls screamed loud enough to hurt my ears, finally breaking my paralysis. Already the man had covered half the distance between us. In less than 10 seconds he would be able to grab me. Like a seasoned trapeze artist, I put one foot and then the other onto the bench, and then I launched myself toward the pole, twisting mid-jump. If you had asked me to perform that same maneuver again, I would have face-planted 10 times out of 10. My fingertips narrowly grabbed at the top of the shelter as my foot swung onto the bolt, my toes slipping off once and twice. Why did it have to rain that day out of all days? Both Evelyn and Georgia reached forward and grabbed my wrist, which did more harm than good, honestly. But all 3 of us were intoxicated with fear and panic. The situation had become a desperate scramble for survival. Past their shoulders, I watched the man disappear beneath the shelter, beyond the point where I could see. His arms would no doubt clamp around my ankles at any moment. It felt like treading water while shark fins circled around, steadily drawing closer. all those sharp teeth hidden below the surface. It was now or never. As the man lunged forward and screamed, I stabbed my toe into the bolt one final time and heaved myself up onto the shelter. As he swiped at my left foot, my trainer came loose and spun off onto the ground. I later thanked God that I hadn't tightened the laces after the shoe fling game. A gigantic bear paw reached up onto the shelter and felt its way along. I reached backward, my shoulders pressed tight against the girl's. All three of us huddled close together, like sardines in a can. The hand reeled back. A moment later, the top half of the man's head popped up. "You little piece of crap." A spiderweb of veins stood out across his temples. "Get down here," he snarled, flames practically spewing from his nostrils. After several failed attempts to climb up, he grabbed the middle post and shook it. The entire structure rocked violently from side to side. This guy was so strong. All three of us hunkered down and clung to a slippery metal rail. I held on so tight that my knuckles started going white, and then, just when my strength was on the absolute verge of giving out, just when I thought I couldn't hold on for another second longer, an adult voice said, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" On the far side of the fence stood Mrs. Mori, accompanied by her German shepherd, Buster. Now Buster was the friendliest dog in the world. That said, he would gladly sink his teeth into a stranger's throat at the command of his owner, especially if said stranger threatened the neighborhood kids who slipped him tasty doggy treats. Buster began to bark crazily, foam flying from his snout. Our pursuer seemed to contemplate the best course of action before grabbing his pack and rushing out the rear gate. By the time that Mrs. Morey and Buster reached us, the guy had slipped away into the forest. Mrs. Morey took us home where Mom called the police, who asked a million questions. Within the hour, they had squad cars patrolling the entire neighborhood. The police called me a hero and commended my quick thinking. Calling for Dad was a stroke of genius, they had said. It had scared off our attacker, who later decided the thing in his pack was too valuable to leave behind. As a reward, I got 10 packs of Pokemon cards. No Charizard, though. The man split town immediately after our encounter, but he was later arrested for stalking a mother and her child, which led to a conviction for a string of murders and abductions, including Michelle Dunbar, although that ordeal took years. That day had a profound effect on everybody. Even now, Evelyn can't hike through a county park alone. But I haven't even told you the worst part of the story, the part that still gives me the occasional sleepless night. 2 weeks after that narrow escape, our neighbor Mr. Bulger had been out foraging for mushrooms and stumbled over a pack half buried in the earth. Hoping to find some ID so he could return the lost item to its rightful owner, Mr. Bulger forced the zipper all the way open and found something horrible, something disgusting. Something that made me cry when I heard, and every day for the next 6 months. I remembered reaching inside and thinking that I had touched a fur coat. I couldn't have been more wrong. Inside were the remains of my ex-babysitter, Michelle Dunbar, chopped up into pieces. I had been feeling along the top of Michelle's severed head,